Stop what you're doing. I need you to hear this first line before anything else. My father sat at the head of a table, surrounded by 60 of the most powerful people in Dallas, Texas, senators, oil executives, federal judges, a man who had once shaken hands with two sitting presidents, and he gave a 45-minute speech about his family legacy. 45 minutes. He talked about his grandfather who built the first cattle ranch. He talked about his father who turned that ranch into a real estate empire. He talked about my older brother Ryan, who he called the torchbearer of everything the Caldwell Name stands for. He talked about my younger sister Becca, who he said carries the grace of this family wherever she goes. And then in 45 minutes of standing at that podium, in front of 60 people, with me sitting 12 feet away in a tailored suit, he never said my name. Not once. Not an oversight. Not a slip. A choice. And the most devastating part, I had been waiting my entire 38 years on this earth for that man to say my name like it mattered. I want to tell you everything. The secrets. The lies. The document I found that didn't just shake my family. It rewrote every single memory I had from childhood. But before I do, I need to know you're in this with me. If you've ever waited your whole life to be seen, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share took me 2 years of pain, of silence, and the kind of clarity that only comes when everything you thought was real turns out to be a carefully constructed story somebody else wrote for you. I promise you, this story goes places you are not ready for. Let's start at the beginning. My name is Jordan Caldwell. Or at least, that's the name I was given. I'm a 38-year-old federal prosecutor based in Austin, Texas. For the last decade, I built a career putting people away for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. I have spent my professional life in a courtroom proving that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, no matter how many lawyers are paid to keep it hidden, always finds its way to the surface. That's the ultimate irony of this story. I was a man who made his living digging up what other people try to hide, completely blind to the thing buried right underneath his own feet. The Caldwell family is Texas royalty. I don't use that word loosely. My father, Gerald Caldwell Sr., built Caldwell and Associates from a mid-sized Fort Worth real estate firm into a billion-dollar commercial development corporation spanning 7 states. His name was on stadiums. His name was on children's hospitals. His name was on a wing of the University of Texas Business School. Gerald Caldwell Sr. was the kind of man who small-town Texas boys pointed to when someone asked them what success looked like. He was also the coldest human being I have ever encountered in my life. And I have sat across interrogation tables from sociopaths. Growing up in the Caldwell house in the Highland Park neighborhood of Dallas, one of the wealthiest zip codes in America, there were 3 kids. Ryan, the oldest, Becca, the youngest, and me, Jordan, sandwiched between them like a comma that nobody was sure needed to be there. Ryan was Gerald's shadow. Tall, square. Gerald talked about Ryan the way some men talk about their legacy, past tense, like it was already written. Becca was the sweetheart. Strawberry blonde, quick to laugh. She was Gerald's softer side made human. He'd melt for Becca in ways I never saw him melt for anyone else. And then there was me. I was darker than both of them. My hair was thicker, curlier at the edges. My eyes were a different shade. My build was different. I noticed these things the way all kids notice things they can't explain, quietly, privately, and then tucking them away in a drawer labeled, "Don't open this." I was also the one who got straight A's, who read books for fun, who wanted to be a lawyer at age 12. None of that impressed Gerald. "A lawyer," he said when I told him my plan. "So you decided to make a living off of other people's problems." That was it. No follow-up question. No tell me more. Just that flat, dismissive statement. And then he picked up the phone and made a call. I was 13 years old. Here's something nobody tells you about growing up in a wealthy family where one parent doesn't love you. You don't get to complain. You go to great schools. You have a nice car by 16. You take family vacations to Colorado and the Cayman Islands. So when you try to explain to someone that you feel invisible, people look at you like you're ungrateful. But deprivation isn't only about what you don't have. Sometimes the deepest deprivation is being surrounded by love that was clearly never meant for you. When Ryan graduated from Texas A&M, Gerald threw him a party at the Dallas Country Club. 300 people. A live band. A custom engraved watch. When I graduated magna cum laude from the University of Texas School of Law, Gerald showed up 40 minutes late, left before the reception, and shook my hand in the parking lot. Firm. Businesslike. The way you'd shake hands with a contractor who just finished a job. He said, "Good. Now go do something with it. Not proud of you. Not I love you. Not even a well done. Go do something with it." I remember standing in that parking lot in my graduation robes, watching his black Escalade pull away, and having this thought, this specific, clear thought that went. He shook my hand the same way he shakes hands with strangers. That's what it felt like to be Gerald Caldwell's middle child. You were always slightly outside the warmth, close enough to see it, too far to feel it. My mother, Sandra, was the peacekeeper. Quiet, elegant. She loved me. I never doubted that. She came to every debate competition, every moot court exhibition, every professional milestone. But she never once stood between me and Gerald's coldness. She was like a woman who could see a slow leak in the ceiling and would put out a bucket every time it rained, but would never call anyone to fix the roof. I used to think, say something. Just once. Make him see me. She never did. And so I learned to be self-sufficient in the way that children of emotional neglect learn, not by becoming hard, but by becoming high-achieving. By the time I was 35, I was one of the youngest federal prosecutors in Texas history. And still, some part of me was that 13-year-old kid hoping Gerald Caldwell would look up from his phone and say, "I see you, son. Let me take you back to the dinner I started this story with." Gerald's 75th birthday, February of last year. I drove up from Austin. 4 hours. I had taken 2 days off work. I had bought a new suit. I had, and this is the part I'm almost embarrassed to admit, rehearsed a toast in my hotel room the night before. I had been working on that toast, in various forms, for 38 years. 60 guests. Round tables. Crystal and candlelight. The whole production. And then Gerald took the microphone. He talked about his grandfather. He talked about his father. He talked about Ryan, who stood up and got applause. He talked about Becca, who burst into tears. And then Gerald smiled, paused, took a sip of water, and began talking about the future of Caldwell and Associates. He said my name exactly 0 times. Not once. I sat at that table and watched the clock on my phone tick through the final 10 minutes of his speech, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't hurt. I was past hurt. It was closer to clarity. My father had made his position clear, and for the first time, I decided to make mine clear too. I stayed through dinner. I was pleasant. I talked to people. I ate my steak, and then I drove back to my hotel, opened my laptop, and started doing what I do best. I started looking. Here's what most people don't know about federal prosecutors. We're trained to build timelines. Everything comes down to timelines. Who was where, when, what they knew, and when they knew it. If you can build a tight enough timeline, you can find the crack, the place where the story stops adding up. I had spent my whole life sensing a crack in my family's story. I had just never professionally turned that instinct on myself. I ran an ancestry DNA test. I told myself it was for health reasons. But if I'm being honest, I told myself the same thing I tell witnesses who claim they don't know why they were in that neighborhood at that time. You knew exactly why you were there. 14 days later, the results came back in my email. I opened them at my desk at the U.S. Attorney's office, between a witness prep meeting and a conference call. I felt prepared. I was not prepared. The paternal results were where everything went sideways, where I expected to find the Northern European ancestry that runs through the Caldwell line. I found something completely different. My paternal ancestry was predominantly Mexican and indigenous Southwestern. I stared at those results for 11 minutes, and then the prosecutor in me woke up. Because those results didn't just tell me about my ancestry. Those results told me that Gerald Caldwell Sr. was not my biological father. And they told me something else, something that every childhood memory suddenly rushed in to confirm. Somebody in this family had known that for 38 years. I built a case file, timeline on the wall, documents in labeled folders. What I found was this. A man whose ancestry profile matched mine so closely that the database flagged us as parent and child with 99.4% certainty. His name was Eduardo Vargas Reyes. He was 64 years old. He was a retired civil engineer. He lived 40 minutes outside San Antonio. He had grown up in the same neighborhood where my mother grew up. I sat with that information for 2 days. 2 days of sitting in my home, staring out the back window, turning that name over in my head like a stone. Eduardo Vargas Reyes. A man who, by every indication, was my biological father. A man whose name I had never heard spoken once in my entire life. I drove to Dallas on a Wednesday morning. I didn't call ahead. My mother was in the kitchen when I let myself in. She was making coffee. She turned around, saw my face. Then she knew. Mothers always know when you found the thing they hid. She sat down at the kitchen table before I even spoke. Like her legs made the decision for her. I put the DNA results on the table. I put the ancestry match report on the table. I folded my hands and I said, quietly and very clearly, Mom, I need you to tell me everything. And I need you to know that I already know enough. That lying will only make this worse. She looked at those papers for a long time. And then she told me. She told me she had grown up next door to the Reyes family in San Antonio. That Eduardo had been her childhood best friend, then her first love. That her parents had not approved. She told me they ended things when the pressure from her family became unbearable. That she had transferred schools to create distance. That she had met Gerald 6 months later and married him within a year. And then she told me the part that changed everything. She told me that before she married Gerald, she had found out she was pregnant. She had panicked. She had done the math and known with absolute certainty that the baby was Eddie's. She told me she called Eddie, that he had told her he would marry her right then if she would come back to San Antonio. Her father told her if she did that, she was dead to him. She had chosen Gerald. And then she said the thing that I have replayed in my head almost every day since. Gerald knew from the very beginning, Jordan. He knew before you were born. He agreed to raise you. And then he spent 38 years punishing me for it, but punishing you. I want to be honest with you about who I am. I am not a violent man. I am not a man who loses control. But I'm going to tell you that when I drove to Gerald's office the morning after, I had to sit in the parking garage for 22 minutes before I trusted myself to walk through those doors. Not because I was afraid of losing my temper, because I needed to be the prosecutor, not the son. Gerald's assistant tried to tell me he was in a meeting. I told her to interrupt it. She looked at my face and picked up the phone. He came out of the conference room irritated, the way he always looked when something inconvenient disrupted his schedule. I said, "We need to talk. Now." We went into his private office. I closed the door. I put the DNA report on his desk and I said, I know everything. Mom told me last night. Gerald looked at the paper. He set down his glasses. He walked to his window, the one that looked out over the Dallas skyline, and he stood there with his back to me for a long time. Then he turned around. And what he said, I am a man who has heard confessions from federal criminals, from people who looked me in the eye and lied about things that destroyed families. What Gerald Caldwell said to me in that moment was the coldest thing I have ever heard from another human being. He said, I held up my end of the arrangement. That's it. Not I'm sorry. Not I know this hurts. Not I should have done better by you. I held up my end of the arrangement. Like I was a business obligation. Like I was a line item in a contract he'd signed before I was born and had been grudgingly honoring ever since. I stood there and I let that sentence land. I let it really land. And then I said, you didn't hold up anything. You collected a son for 38 years and gave me nothing but the electricity bill. You call what you did raising me. I call it warehousing. You kept my body alive and starved everything else. He didn't respond. I said, I have one question. Just one. Did you ever, even once, try? He looked at me for a long time. And then he said, you were a daily reminder of something I never wanted to remember. I nodded. I picked up the DNA report from his desk. I walked out. And I have not spoken to Gerald Caldwell since that morning. I called Ryan first. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, Jordan, I have to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it. He told me that about 8 years ago, he had found a document. That he had confronted Gerald at the time, and Gerald had told him to leave it alone. He said, I should have told you. I knew something was wrong, and I looked away, because it was easier. And I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. You deserve better than that from me. I want to be honest, that one hit differently than I expected. I told him it wasn't his fault. He said, no, but it's my responsibility. You're my brother. That doesn't change. Becca called me before I even had a chance to call her. She was crying before she said hello. She said she loved me. She said she was furious. And then she said, you know what the wild thing is? I always loved you the most because you were the one who tried the hardest. And I never understood why Dad couldn't see it. I had to pull my car over when she said that. I drove south on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the confrontation with Gerald. It was a small ranch-style house at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by live oaks and native Texas plants. A truck sat in the driveway. A wind chime moved on the porch. I sat in the car for a while. Then I got out. I knocked. The man who answered the door was lean, weathered, with gray threading through dark hair, and the kind of face that had spent a lot of decades under a hard Texas sun. When he saw me standing on his porch, when he really looked at me, something happened in his expression that I was not prepared for. His eyes filled. He said quietly, Jordan, not a question, a recognition. I said, you know who I am. He said, I've known what you look like since you were 22. I found you once a long time ago, and then I had to decide whether finding you was for you or for me. He stepped back. He held the door open. He said, come in. I put coffee on an hour ago. Like I knew. He told me his version. He told me that Sandra had been the love of his life at 20 years old. That when she stopped returning his calls, he had assumed she had simply moved on. He told me he had done the math, that he had struggled with what to do for years. He said, I made a choice to stay away because you had a life, and I didn't know if walking into it would help you or break something that was working. He paused. Then he said, I thought about you every single year on your birthday. Every single one. 38 birthdays. 38 times this man sat somewhere and thought about a son he had never been allowed to know. I asked him, do you have other kids? He said yes. 2 daughters. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos, my half-sisters. He watched me look at them, and he said very quietly, they know about you. They've known for years. I told them the truth a long time ago, because I decided my kids deserve the truth. He paused. They said if you ever wanted to meet them, they'd like that. I put the phone down on the table, and I did something I had not done in front of another person in years. I cried, not from sadness, or not only from sadness. I cried from the specific, overwhelming experience of being seen, of sitting across from someone who had thought of me for 38 years, not as an obligation, not as an arrangement, not as a reminder of something unwanted, but as a son. Eduardo reached across the table and put his hand on mine. He didn't say anything. He just let me be there. After a while, I said, I spent my whole career learning to find the truth, no matter how deep someone buried it. It never occurred to me that the most important truth I'd ever need to find was in my own DNA. He smiled. He said, you became a federal prosecutor. I said, yeah. He said, I became an engineer. I spent 40 years building things that last. He paused. Maybe that's the same work, different materials. About a month after meeting Eduardo, Ryan called. He said he'd gone back to those old files, and he wanted me to come see them. In the back of a folder tucked behind a partnership agreement was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Handwritten, not Jordan Caldwell, just Jordan. I opened it. It was a letter. 3 pages. Handwritten in Gerald's precise, architectural print, dated 7 years ago. In that letter, Gerald admitted everything. He admitted he had known before I was born. He admitted he had agreed to raise me and then been unable to separate me from what he called the failure of his marriage's foundation. He used the phrase, I was not equipped 4 times. He did not apologize. But at the end of the letter, in the final paragraph, he wrote something that I have not been able to shake. I watched you become something I never could have built. And I don't know if that is a credit to you or a condemnation of me. He never sent it. He wrote it, sealed it, put it in a file with my name on it, and never sent it. 7 years. I sat at Ryan's dining room table for a long time after reading it, and I thought, that's the whole story right there. He knew. He had words. He just never had the courage to deliver them. Cowardice dressed up as control. It's the oldest story in the world. I want to tell you what my life looks like now, 1 year after that birthday dinner that cracked everything open. Eduardo and I talk every week. We're not rushing anything. We're 2 grown men who are essentially starting from scratch. His daughters, my half-sisters Marisol and Caitlin, and I have had dinner twice. They are extraordinary women. Warm, direct, funny. The first time I noticed that Caitlin tilts her head slightly to the left when she's thinking, exactly like I do. I had to look away for a moment. I have never had that experience before, of seeing myself in someone else. I didn't know how much I needed it until I had it. Gerald and I have not spoken since that morning in his office. I'm not ready to forgive him, and I'm not willing to pretend that what he did was acceptable, because he's getting old. My mother and I are in a difficult and important place. I love her. I have never stopped loving her. But I'm also honest with myself about what her silence cost me. We are working through it. Slowly. With a therapist. It's not fast. It's not clean. It's real. Ryan is my brother. Full stop. No asterisks. 2 weeks ago, he drove down to Austin for a Friday night with no agenda. Just two brothers eating barbecue on a porch until midnight. It was one of the best nights I've had in years. Becca texted me this morning. Just a meme, and the words, "Love you." That's Becca. Consistent as sunrise. And me? I changed my email signature 6 months ago. It says Jordan Reyes Caldwell, Assistant United States Attorney. Both names. I'm not erasing where I came from. I'm not pretending the Caldwell years didn't happen. But I'm also not walking around with only half a name anymore. I earned the right to the full thing. I'm going to say something now that I believe is as true in a family kitchen as it is in front of a federal judge. The truth is not fragile. The truth does not need protecting. The truth will sit quietly in an envelope in a file cabinet for 7 years, and it will still be there, completely intact, when you finally open it. What is fragile, what does need protecting, is the person who is living inside a lie that somebody else built around them. If you grew up in a family where you felt like the asterisk, the one who was tolerated but never celebrated, included but never chosen, I need you to understand something. That was not a reflection of your value. That was a reflection of someone else's limitation. Gerald Caldwell spent 38 years telling me, in every way except words, that I was not worth his full attention. And I spent 38 years responding to that message by becoming one of the most effective federal prosecutors in the state of Texas. The very thing he tried to use to diminish me became the exact tool I used to find my way out. I do not thank him for that. Gerald's coldness was not a gift. It was a wound. But I'll tell you what I do believe. I believe that the version of me who existed before that birthday dinner, the version who was still hoping, at 38 years old, that Gerald would say my name with pride, that version of me deserved better. And the only person who could give him better was me. So I did. I found the truth. I drove south on a Thursday morning. I sat at a scratched kitchen table with a man who had thought about me on every birthday for 38 years. I cried in front of a stranger. And it turned out he wasn't a stranger at all. And I came back to Austin with both my names. If you watch this all the way to the end, I want you to know that means something to me. Because this story cost me something to tell. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if any part of this hit home. If you've ever been the one at the table who wasn't really seen, just say, "I hear you." That's it. Share this story with one person today. You already know who it is. Subscribe, follow. Because I'm not done. I have more to say about what happens when you build a new family identity in your late 30s, about the conversations I'm still having with Eduardo, about what forgiveness looks like when you're not sure you're ready for it. I'm Jordan Reyes Caldwell, federal prosecutor, son of Eduardo, brother of Ryan and Becca and Marisol and Caitlin, a man who spent his career finding buried truths for other people, and finally found his own. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself out there. And if nobody told you today, you are not invisible. You are not the asterisk. You are the whole story. Go live like it.